Tell me what to do. Show me how to feel under your control. Everything is real, so hit me. So hit me.
Hey guys, it's Katie. Welcome back to my channel. So for today's video, I thought I would take you through sort of like a vlog style study with me, study tips, that kind of thing. So it's currently midterm week for me and I have a test on Friday. It is Tuesday, the day that I am filming this, and I haven't started studying for this midterm yet. And so I thought it'd be kind of cool to just take you through like the entire process of like beginning to end, how I'm gonna study and prepare for this midterm, and kind of just like throwing in general tips and stuff like that, because I tend to think I'm like a good studier kind of student. I tend to do pretty well on tests, but that's just because I've kind of perfected my method of studying. So this test I'm having is for a quantitative methods research course. It's a sociology methods kind of class, but I feel like the tips can kind of work for any class. I think the most important thing to take away from just starting off like this is to figure out what kind of test it's going to be. Like, ask your professor what the form is going to be. You know, is it going to be multiple choice? Is it going to be mashing, short answer, essay, that kind of thing? Is it going to be, you know, conceptual? And then I feel like you kind of figure out as you go through school what kind of test taker you are, what kinds of forms of tests are easier for you, and what kinds of studying you need to do for certain forms of testing. Like for me personally, I know this test is going to be partially multiple choice and then partially short answer, and so multiple choice is always pretty easy for me. I don't have to study super hard for it. If I like see the definition or something on the page, I'll recognize it even if I didn't study super hard. But for short answer, when you just obviously have to know it, I have to study really hard for those kind of tests. So this one, there's a lot of different vocabulary, there's a lot of different terms, there's a lot of applying terms, so I have a lot of information to go through. So the first thing I'm going to do is I always collect all of the materials that I'm going to use for studying, obviously. So for this, I'm going to use the notes that I take in class, the textbook chapters that we've used. My professor has put old PowerPoints online for us to look at, and then also we've taken online quizzes throughout the semester, so I'm going to look at those old quizzes and the results and like which questions I missed and stuff like that. And then obviously I'm going to use our study guide as a guide. Okay, so just to give you an example, this is what my study guide for this exam looks like. Like, she maps out all of the different topics and stuff we need to know, and there's clearly a lot of information. And so what I'll do is I'm gonna end up printing this out, and then I go through and I pick the things that I absolutely like already know and I don't need to study. Like Hawthorne effect, that's easy, don't need to study that. And I'll usually like highlight those one color, and then I'll go through and I'll find the topics that I like look at, and I'm like, I could not wing this if I tried. Like, I have absolutely no idea, and I will highlight those a different color, and those are top priority. Those are the things that I clearly know the least about, and so I will prioritize those and I will study those first. And the way this kind of helps is it breaks everything up, so I'm not like trying to study the entire study guide at once. I like make the most important things, like the biggest things to tackle, and I do those first, and after I feel like I've mastered those is when I move on to the next set of ideas that I need to study. And then the things that I highlighted that were like easy, if I have time at the end, I will study those a little bit, but there are also the things that I know, like if I don't have enough time, it's not a big deal if I don't study those because I think I already know them, you know? And so then from here, I feel like there's two routes that I typically go. I either take like a sheet of paper and I just like write each thing that's on the study guide and like write the answer to it, like an explanation, or I'll make flashcards if it's more like vocab based. Luckily, this class, even though it is like statistics and stuff, we don't have to do a whole lot of math or calculations. If that were the case, then I would be doing like practice problems and stuff. And actually, the first thing I'm going to do before I even go to the study guide is I'm going to just go to my notes that I took in class of everything that's going to be on the test and just read over it, just to kind of refresh my memory before I even make like a more I don't know, focused attack at studying. I just kind of do like an overall general refresher. Another thing that'll kind of affect how I decide to focus my studying is like how recently we learned it. Like the chapter on experiments and stuff, we did the most recently, so that's like the most fresh in my mind. But the stuff on unobtrusive research was like over a month ago, so I've forgotten a lot of that stuff. So I'm probably gonna start with the stuff that we learned a long time ago because it's the least fresh in my mind. Another thing I want to note, in case it wasn't obvious, is the way that I do this is when I'm going through the study guide and I'm trying to find the answers to each of these points and whatever, I look at my notes first. And if I can't find it in my notes, that's when I go to the textbook for more clarification. I don't usually look at the textbook unless I can't find the answer somewhere else, just because usually the information that's on the test is stuff that we've talked about in class, which is going to be more in my notes, whereas the textbook has a lot of other information that's probably not going to be relevant, so it kind of saves some time. So right now what I've been doing is making some flashcards. I'm just focusing on the third section of the study guide, which is like the furthest away in time from when we did it, the stuff that's like the least fresh in my mind. So that's all the unobtrusive research stuff. And I'm also making a list as I go, just on a sticky note, of things that I can't find in my notes. And so once I'm finished making all of the flashcards, I'll go back into the textbook and see if I can find these things. And then if not, I have a list of things to ask my professor about. And what's good about starting to study early is we have class on Wednesday, and then the test isn't until Friday, so we have a day in class to like ask her things. And if that's not the case, if you've like put off studying, you can always like email the professor. At least mine are all really good about that. So that's just important to keep a list of the things that you're not super sure about, because even if you have something in your notes that you think might be it, I think it's always good to ask for clarification on what exactly the professor's looking for. And yeah, I actually remember more of this stuff than I thought I did, so if this doesn't take too long, I'll probably jump to a second section in the study guide and do both of those today. But since I have several days to study, since this test isn't until Friday, it would be okay, like, if this one section took a long time, to just do one section a day and then to, you know, review one section at the start of the next day before starting on the second one. Hopefully that made sense. Something that I find helpful when I'm studying, and especially when I'm making these flashcards and stuff, is as I'm going through the study guide, like I said, I'm making that list as I go of things that I don't know or that I can't find or I'm not sure about. And I find it really helpful to make that list and then move on, so you're not like disrupting your momentum and you just keep going and writing all of the things that you can find and you do know, and then going back for the ones that you don't know. I kind of use that same mentality when I'm taking the actual test. I just go through it once really quickly with all of the stuff that's easy for me, and then I'll go back for anything I wasn't sure about. It might not work for everyone, but I definitely find that kind of helps me get a better rhythm for studying, and it just like makes, I don't know. If you like disrupt your momentum and get distracted, sometimes it can be hard to get back into it.
So hit me. So hit me. First a confession. With you, I feel a connection. With you, it's like an infection. I've been infected with an obsession. With you, never any tension. Nothing but love and affection. Enough of my case, so let's cut to the chase. Listen up, cause these are the directions. Obey what I say, don't complain, I don't wanna hear questions.
So once I have all of my note cards and everything made, what I like to do is kind of break them up into sections and focus on mastering a certain section and then like adding on to that. So I'll take like 10 note cards, and until I memorize those other 10, I don't look at any of the other ones, and then I start like adding to that pile and like slowly building on the number that I have mastered. And then once I've done that and I feel like I've memorized everything that I took like straight off the study guide, that's when I look at other things just to kind of like solidify that. So that's when I'll pull out my own quizzes just to kind of review them and remind myself of what was on them and the kinds of questions that she'd asked before. That's when I'll pull out the textbook and just kind of like skim over it and like read the passages on any topics or like vocab that I'm not like super comfortable with, just to kind of like refresh myself on like the full explanation of anything, or I'll like reread my notes again or something like that. So I kind of used like the note cards in the study guide as like the main form of studying, and then I use everything else around it just to kind of supplement it and kind of solidify the studying that I've already done, if that makes sense. So I feel like that's everything that, like, that's the whole process for what I'm gonna do for this. But I did tweet out asking if you guys had any specific questions, just like in general, that you wanted me to talk about. So I guess I'll just like answer them now, because some of them like weren't answered in this video. So I'm gonna pull those up. Okay, so I got a lot of questions about like time management, like how do you balance your time and not totally freak out, like what are some of the ways you do to keep track of everything you have to do and stuff like that. So I have to write it down for sure. I make a to-do list every single day just on a sticky note, and then I stick it on the front of my desk so I have to look at it. I also tend to make to-do lists right before I go to bed, just in my journal, of like everything, not even just like homework, just like goals of everything I want to do that day. So I like write it out before I even go to sleep, and then I make another to-do list when I wake up in the morning, and then I carry around a planner to my classes so I can write things down so I don't forget them. So yeah, just writing things down and then like making a to-do list really helps me, and those to-do lists that I make on sticky notes, I try and make them by priority. And then I also have a whiteboard that I'll make to-do lists on, and this is more where I put like where things are due, so I have that visual so I can like see it every day to remind myself when things are coming up. And then I also have a calendar on my wall where I write due dates for everything coming up that month, just so nothing surprises me. So balancing your time and not totally freaking out is just being aware of things before they come up, so you give yourself enough time to like balance everything. It doesn't mean I don't freak out. I do totally freak out sometimes, but I try really hard to plan ahead and organize and like space things out enough that it's not that bad. Also, just like using your time wisely. I have breaks between a lot of my classes, just like 1 hour breaks, which could easily be wasted time, but instead I like force myself to go to the library and work during that time, and that time adds up and I end up getting so much done that way. So hopefully that answered that. Staying focused, I just can't focus for long periods of time. I know that, so I'll like set a timer and like force myself to work for like half an hour or an hour or something, and then I'll give myself short breaks, and that kind of keeps me like focused for however long I've set for myself. I need to start working on my assignment, but I am stuck and don't know how to start. Any tips on how to begin? It totally depends on what you're trying to do. For me, if it's like a paper and I'm like stuck and I don't know what I want to do, usually I'll have an idea of something I want to write about in the paper. Even if it's not at the beginning or whatever, I'll just start writing something, even if it's not in chronological order, and then I'll like figure it out later, you know? And also just kind of giving yourself permission for it to be really bad. My rough drafts are really bad, but at least I got something written down, and then it's a lot easier to go back and fix it later. Any tips for how to deal with anxiety but focus on exam would be great. Having anxiety during exams is really hard. I think it's just important to find outlets to kind of like help you with your stress. For me, I work out a lot during exam week because that just like helps me de-stress and like stay sane. I also do a lot of yoga and like meditation, and also just like setting aside boundaries and like knowing that like after this time I'm not gonna study. Like I'm not gonna stay up until like 2 a.m. studying, because sleep, for me, having enough sleep is just as important as having enough study time. So just like setting boundaries and taking care of your like mental and physical health can definitely help and make sure that the time doesn't get like super overwhelming. And just remember to take a step back and look at things in perspective. Like obviously you want to do well, it's totally cool, but not getting like an A on this test isn't going to ruin your life, but you like destroying yourself trying to get that A is definitely going to harm your quality of life. And then I had someone ask about how I go about writing papers. Like, do you map out what you're going to do beforehand, or do you use a different method? Sometimes I have a difficult time knowing where exactly to start. That totally depends on the paper. A lot of the times I'll just brainstorm ahead of time, like topic sentences or just like points I want to reach. Especially if it's like a literary paper, I'll pull out the evidence that I'm going to use from the text, like quotes or specific examples, and just kind of make a list to brainstorm, and then I'll just kind of start like branching out and writing there. So I have this like patchwork of like paragraphs and sentences that I'm going to use, and then I kind of just like push them all together in a document and then kind of like knit it together and try and make it look like a paper. I don't know if that made any sense, but no, I don't really plan it out. I just kind of brainstorm my way through until I come up with my ideas, and then I try and shape it into a paper. So yeah, I think that's everything for this video. Hopefully you guys found it helpful. If you have any other questions for me, feel free to leave them in a comment down below, and I'll try to answer as many of those as I can. Or feel free to drop your own advice or best tips down there for other people to see. I think that would be super helpful. And yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you're having a fabulous day, and I'll just see you in my next video very soon. Bye.